It was Oscar Wilde, I think, who said that experience is simply the name we give to our mistakes. The point being that you can't create something great without failing first. Sports, art, languages, writing, name anything you want to become good at, you won't ever make it there without failing first. Over and over and over again. And I think that this is exactly what makes this scene here during the Arlong Park arc so amazing, as it's the first time that we can truly see Oda improving upon a couple of earlier mistakes he made and taking a big step forward in his storytelling overall. And so the chapters for today's scene will focus around 76 to 81 and episode 37 of the anime. And you can also watch the scene in the episode of Nami, which by the way sounds a lot more like Nami having an emotional outburst than the title of a movie. Oh, I see what you did there, Funimation. However, I gotta say that the original anime here is actually pretty damn good, so you can choose whichever you prefer. As always, you can but really shouldn't skip the recap by going to the timecode up here, and make sure to grab yourself a nice cup of coffee, as I got right here. Why drink so much coffee, you ask? Well, obviously, it's cause I grind a lot. The scene takes place shortly after leaving the Baratie and the Straw Hats chasing after Nami, who has stolen the Mary to go home. After a first encounter of Zoro with Arlong and the fishmen, him, Luffy, and Sanji encounter Nami on the road to Kokoyashi village. As we've already seen multiple times during the arc, Nami tries to distance herself from the crew, trying her best to make them leave the island so she can finally fulfill her deal with Arlong to free her village in exchange for 100 million berries, and of course also to protect her new friends. However, at this point she already has saved both Zoro and Usopp from the fishman's hands, and so when she tries to convince everyone that she actually killed Usopp, Zoro starts towards her to once again expose her facade, as he done before at Arlong Park. Sanji, however, misinterprets it as Zoro trying to attack her and tries to stop him. And while Zoro tells him that he understands nothing,
you know nothing, Jon Snow.
He also doesn't care to explain Nami's true intentions to either him or Luffy. And so, once Nami leaves for her home, Sanji asks Zoro if he thinks that she truly killed Usopp, and Zoro jokes that she actually might have after he called her Komono, which means small thing, to which Sanji immediately becomes infuriated again. Now, this joke here is especially funny in Japanese, as Zoro uses Komono in this panel here in the sense of Nami being a small fry who can't even let one person die. Since Komono literally means small thing, however, Sanji immediately takes this as Zoro referring to her chest size. Something that apparently not only Sanji, but also Oda took serious offense in. And so, Zoro and Sanji start brawling again, much to the despise of Usopp, who has finally made his way back after escaping through the water and is caught between the two. Seeing that Usopp is still alive, all of them now know for sure that Nami is in fact a good person trying to protect them. Then we get the heartbreaking and actually quite a bloody backstory of Nami from Nojiko that finally uncovers the full picture we were missing since first meeting her in Orange Town.
Nojiko! Nami!
Once we finally know what's actually going on, we see the Marines arriving at Nami's house. Having been tipped off by Arlong, they have come to collect the almost 100 million berries that Nami had collected over the last 8 years. In this moment, Nami learns from Jen that the entire village had known about Nami's true intentions all along, and that they simply were trying to give her an easy way out from her burden. Infuriated and feeling betrayed, Nami storms to Arlong Park to confront the fishman, who only laughs in her face. And so, after what happened, the villagers have seen enough and decide to finally take up arms against Arlong, determined to get revenge for Nami and themselves. And when returning to the village, Nami tries to stop them, but they've already made up their mind. And so, after seeing her people marching towards certain death and being on the verge of losing everything she has worked and suffered for, the disillusioned Nami becomes enraged by the Arlong tattoo on her shoulder and in a heartbreaking and horrifying moment starts jamming her knife into it. Before she can deal any more harm to herself, however, Luffy stops her. It's in this moment of greatest desperation that she finally turns to Luffy, and in an extremely emotional moment asks him for help. It's heartbreaking, and when Luffy enthusiastically agrees and makes his march to Arlong Park with Sanji, Zoro, and Usopp, it's enthralling to know that Arlong will finally get the justice he deserves. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there is one thing in particular that makes this scene and the overarching Arlong Park arc so special in the larger context of the narrative. And that is the storytelling here, and how Oda placed this arc into the structure of the story. I really believe that Arlong Park is a gigantic step forward in terms of Oda's storytelling skills and improves on a number of elements in the earlier East Blue arcs. What makes the climactic moment with Nami so powerful here is that it's been worked towards for a long time. In a way, you could even say that Arlong Park is the very first mini-saga of the story that has been spun into most of the previous arcs. It's of course not comparable with, for example, the Yonko saga spanning from Fishman Island all the way to Wano, as the build-up's way smaller and also a lot more subtle. However, it's the very first time that Oda proves to us his talent for long-term planning and foreshadowing that become more and more pronounced throughout the plot. The hints pointing to Arlong Park are relatively small, but they're there. For instance, when Luffy first meets Nami, she tells him that she's going to earn 100 million berries for a certain purpose. Or during the Baratie arc, Nami abandons the crew and steals the Mary after seeing a bounty poster of a mysterious pirate named Arlong. It's definitely not much, but it gets our attention, and these long-term references culminating in Arlong Park create way deeper resonance and impact than many of the earlier mini-arcs. And so it's not for nothing that it's still one of the most popular One Piece arcs of all time. Because with Arlong Park, Oda proves to us that you don't necessarily need world-shattering, history-changing stakes in order to be invested in the conflict at hand, but that all you need is some damn good storytelling. Now, there are maybe 2.5 things in particular that I think that Oda has improved on in this arc compared to the first 4. Backstory, battle, and placement. For Zoro and Usopp, Oda had yet to figure out how to incorporate a backstory properly into the narrative. Both are revealed after the events of their arc already have taken place and feel almost like an afterthought to the central conflict. However, when reaching the Baratie, I think he slowly began to understand the importance of tying the backstory of a new character into the conflict at hand. And so, by learning about Sanji's past and his connection to Zeph, we understand why it's important to him to protect the Baratie and his mentor. But it still has no real connection to neither Don Krieg nor Mihawk. And so, on my first watch of the series, I was a little confused and worried that Nami wasn't even gonna get a standard backstory like the other crew members. The pattern seemed pretty clear. Luffy and co land on an island, find a new crew member, we get a glimpse of their backstory, Luffy defeats the bad guy, and the crew moves on +1. And so I began to worry that Nami would be glossed over and underused like female characters often are in this type of series. However, as it turns out, by Arlong Park, Oda finally had figured out how to use the characters' backstories to his advantage. And so I was relieved when I realized that Arlong Park was about to be Nami's arc, and that we'd finally get to see her backstory. And what a backstory it was. And so, when Luffy finally defeats Arlong and destroys the grotesque castle that he's built for himself, it isn't just vaguely related to Nami's backstory, it's the resolution to it. Not only did Luffy knock out the man who had tormented and tortured her for the past 8 years of her life, but he destroys the very room that Nami has worked in for so many years, along with Arlong Park itself, the symbol of oppression that had been looming over the citizens of the island all this time. The events of Arlong Park and the reveal of Nami's backstory have to occur simultaneously, because they are essentially the same conflict. One can't happen without the other. And from here on out, Oda pretty much has carried the success of this formula into every single new arc where we meet a new Straw Hat. Chopper's connection to Walpole, Vivi's connection to Crocodile, Frankie's and Robin's connection to the world government, Brook's connection to Moria, and finally, Jinbei's connection to Hody and Arlong, who's actually name dropped for the very first time here in this arc, going full circle. And to illustrate this point a bit further even, when you look at Robin's rescue at Enies Lobby, it actually comes pretty close to this moment here. Arguably a bit better and more creatively executed, but pretty much the same formula. Trying to distance themselves from the crew to protect them, but ultimately accepting Luffy's love and asking to be saved, plus the epic walk. And that already brings me to my second, or actually first and a half point, 1.5 point, 1.5 point, to my next point, placement. This scene between Luffy and Nami and the other Straw Hats is not an isolated string of events, but is reused and referenced by Oda over and over again and woven into the larger fabric of the story. The events of Arlong Park keep being relevant as the story progresses, as we meet more and more fishmen like Jinbei and Tom that actually seem to be anything but the cruel monster that Arlong represents. And so, once we arrive on Fishman Island after the time skip, Oda turns our entire perception of the arc on its head. When Arlong and his men were introduced as the very first non-human race, Oda made us believe that the fishmen were highly racist, spouting racial slurs, and based their cruel behavior towards Nami and her people on their racial superiority. However, we very quickly learned that the truth is actually the exact opposite. The fishmen are actually the ones who have suffered for centuries under racial oppression and slavery by the hands of the humans. And Arlong and his men were the pitiful and dark result of discrimination and prosecution with a quite tragic backstory. And so, looking back, the once intimidating and seemingly unbeatable fishmen now look like weak and helpless rejects who try to take revenge on the humans by leaving the Grand Line and enforcing their will on some of the most vulnerable people they could find. Arlong Park turns out to be a quite depressing imitation of 𝚙𝚘𝚜𝚑𝚘 Park as an aspirational dream of the young and oppressed, but still full of hatred fishmen, looking for more acceptance. This twist is actually already well foreshadowed by Oda through the character of Hachan, who's already hinted at to be nice and naive when bringing Zoro into the village, despite him being human and coming strolling out of Arlong Park. Later, we get an entire cover story for him and finally meet him again as an ally at 𝚙𝚘𝚜𝚑𝚘. And so, the entire Arlong Park arc feels like an organic piece of narration and world building in the larger context of the story that makes this moment between Nami and the Straw Hats just the more powerful, something that is missing from previous arcs, though Oda admittedly found ways to reference them again later on during Luffy's backstory or Sanji's blackmail during Whole Cake Island. But it's not quite as smooth as Arlong Park, since Oda clearly already had the plot thread with the fishmen planned and foreshadowed here. Now, the third thing that I think Oda does wonderfully in this scene is battle. Something that this scene manages to do way better than the arcs before is bring out the Straw Hats as a real crew and collective. Up until now, it was mostly Luffy beating someone's ass and occasionally Zoro jumping in to fight someone else. Since One Piece is a world of pirates though, it just makes sense that each villain would have a crew of their own to contend with. But Arlong Park is the very first arc that truly utilized this to its fullest capacity, as Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp all face off against a different one of Arlong's officers and get the chance to prove themselves as worthy members. Despite being grievously wounded by Mihawk, Zoro is able to stay on his feet long enough to defeat Hachi and then fend off Arlong, while Sanji goes to save the stuck Luffy. And he's also capable enough to fight off a fishman in the water and come out alive. And even Usopp, who's at the time clearly the weakest of the group, manages to take down one of Arlong's strongest men. And then of course, Luffy also beats Arlong, and all of it started with the epic walk to Arlong Park in this moment here. And the reason that this works so well here goes beyond Nami's salvation hinging on each individual Straw Hat victory, because each member in this arc also has something to prove for themselves. Each victory is not just a win for the cause, but validation for the individual against an enemy that has been built up as the strongest so far in the story. Once again, we see this pattern repeated on a larger scale in Enies Lobby, where Robin's salvation is dependent on each Straw Hat winning, but each of them also trying to prove something for themselves. As you can see, storytelling is a gigantic factor in what makes this scene so fantastic. And of course that goes for all other scenes after this as well, but I really thought it was worth pointing it out here, as it was such a big step up from previous arcs. For instance, the double twist Oda does with Nami's character, where at first she tries to pretend like she was evil, but then turns out to have been her true self all along. As well as the way that Luffy and Zoro show her that she can't fool them, with Zoro jumping into the water and making her save him, as well as Luffy simply waiting for her to ask him for help, are fantastically portrayed in the dialogue and body language. And besides Arlong Park and Luffy destroying Nami's room, there's also a lot more great symbolism here. For instance, Nami's anger, first at her helplessness against evil and then against the evil itself, takes the form of her dagger, which Oda explicitly, in a quite gory way, shows her stabbing straight into her tattoo, a symbol of her emotional imprisonment and Arlong's tyranny. Similarly, Nami crying and asking for help after promising as a child that she would never cry again and ask anyone for help shows us how Luffy manages to save people and give them hope. And in this scene here, he of course shows this especially through his straw hat, that is Luffy's biggest treasure and that he will let no one under any circumstances wear. And yet he gives it to Nami, showing how much he trusts in her and that she is just important to her as his hat. And I think that this encompasses really well everything what makes this moment here so fantastic. And since we learned in this video how Oda drastically improved his backstories in this arc, why not test this theory right with the next Straw Hat? Because this is not only one of my favorite moments, but also has been requested a bunch of times by now, which I think shows that you guys have real great taste. And so we'll be looking at that scene in the next video, so stay tuned for that. Thanks guys, peace.